The Rams, Lucas fires for the win! Oh! Jared Lucas!
Hello and welcome to the CBB Supershow, brought to you by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Deuce85, and I just had to throw that on there real quick because, my goodness, we are just about turning the page from February, entering into March, and to see Jared Lucas hit that half-court shot to just take the wind out of Colorado State sails was incredible. We are in buzzer beater season. Hopes and dreams and heartache and broken promises and dreams, and it's just going to be phenomenal. The whole line about how can you not be romantic about baseball? Honestly, how could you not be romantic about college basketball? The absolute best sport in the galaxy. I won't take any debate on that whatsoever. Absolutely love it. That was awesome. I'm not a big Jared Lucas fan. I'm not even a big Nevada fan, but I can appreciate a play like that. All right, we are going to get into it. Welcome all of you who are new, checking out the Super Show for the first time. I appreciate you, and you returning vets. You know what to do. Pull your seat up, grab a donut. Let's get it cracking. All of you guys come together. Help me out. Drop a like on this video / show. It really helps with our viewership numbers. And when people type in things like CBB, DFS, it helps a tremendous amount. Never even realized how much it truly does help. And it makes sense why all the creators beg for likes so much. I never really wanted to do that, but it does help a lot. And I got to say, please drop that like, help us out, interact with us throughout the show or on demand. Comments, questions, concerns, we address them all. It is a 10-game slate on tap. We are going to be covering it game by game, the tried and true method. We'll be covering it in terms of my top options, favorites, any sneaks, anything that I'm not looking at, who I think might be a bust. We'll talk a little bit about some of the early projections that we have, any DVP spots, core plays, prize picks, any betting opportunities, all that good stuff. There were two last night where the lines, I've been talking to my man Jamie in the Discord. We've had a few opportunities here to make some bets that the lines just didn't seem right. We've had a couple that really didn't make sense. George Washington live the other night against St. Joe's plus 14.5. I don't know what that was. We hit that. They ended up losing by 3. The two that I talked about last night that really didn't make sense. First one, Arkansas being 10-point favorites against Vanderbilt. I know Vanderbilt's played pretty poorly this year, but it's not as if Arkansas is a good team. Vandy ends up beating them by 3. That was an odd one. And then, of course, Kansas being 7-point favorites against a pretty good BYU team without Kevin McCullough. I don't think so. They end up losing that one outright. Kansas is going to do some free falling here in the seeds and might end up being a 2 or a 3 here, depending on what the next couple of games look like. They'll be a dangerous 2 or 3 if that does happen. Owen Freeman was a disappointment. I tell you guys, we do the bad with the good. He did not work out there against Penn State. However, I did have a ton of Peyton Sandford, who had a triple-double, which I believe may have been the first triple-double in Iowa men's basketball history. Fantastic game from him. He was massive. Kevin Miller, who our guy Boopy was underpriced at 5'9", only 15%. He came through, almost scored 30, despite the fact that Wake Forest talked about this at length last night. Our guy Forbes, we want him to make the tournament. Wake Forest has to win this game. They can't drop these gimmies. They lose 70-65 to a Notre Dame team that they just could not afford to lose to. I don't think Wake Forest is going to make the tournament. I feel very nervous about them now. That was a game they simply couldn't lose. We talked about it a lot. The rest of their schedule, Virginia Tech on the road, that's not going to be a good one. That's not an easy win. Georgia Tech at home, that should be an easy one. Should be. And then they end the season with a home game against a Clemson team that's also starting to limp their way through. The Clemson did get a nice win against Pittsburgh, though, so that will be a tough game for Wake Forest. According to Lunardi, they had to win 2 more games in the regular season and at least 1, maybe 2 in the ACC tournament. They just made things a lot more difficult for themselves by losing to Notre Dame. Awful. Blue Kane got the start for Georgia. He was a cheap value, made it about 17 fantasy points. He looked pretty good. It makes a lot of sense now going forward for Georgia to play their younger players. I really like the Dylan James kid. He is the other freshman that was pretty highly ranked coming out of high school. I think the remaining Georgia games, which are Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Auburn, those are all tough spots. I wouldn't expect them to win any of those games. So it would make sense for Georgia to play the younger players. They're already giving Silas Demery a ton of minutes. Blue Kane getting the start there, that was interesting. Jabir Abdur-Rahim is dealing with some injury issues. And then the freshman Dylan James, who did play 18 minutes tonight, had 9 points, 2 rebounds, looked very good. And I got to tell you, we saw our guy, Matthew Alexander Moncrief. He played 10 uneventful minutes, but I think that was the first bit of action he's seen in quite a long time. Mentioned it in the Discord, and I was pretty high on him too, but collectively as a group, the DFS community may never have been more wrong about a player than we were on Matthew Alexander Moncrief. Many of us thought he was going to be a SEC player of the year type caliber type player when he came to Georgia. There was all the talk about him being a point forward when he got there. Didn't really work out that well at Oklahoma State. Didn't work out, unfortunately, Matthew Alexander Moncrief. But it was nice. It brought a tear to my eye to see him on the court there playing against LSU. As far as anything else tonight, the Texas stack didn't work out quite as well. Darian Williams did have over 30 fantasy points, so he did work. Joey T didn't have a horrible game either. Pop Isaacs didn't do well. Dylan Mitchell was awful. Didn't see that coming. Dylan Dessou absolutely crushed. Max Asmus did pretty well. Overall, Texas gets a much-needed victory over Texas Tech. They had to have that game. They get it 81-69. They finished their season with a home game against Oklahoma State, on the road against Baylor, and a home game against Oklahoma. They should be able to beat Oklahoma State. That game will be on Saturday. Our guy Dylan Dessou starting to heat up at the right time. You know the deal. All right, that's the recap for today. Let's get into this Wednesday 10-game slate for February 28th of 2024. If you can believe it, we're going to be right into March here. Let's get into it. Let's dive in. Let's talk about it. The Missouri versus Florida game will kick us off here. By the way, I think I fixed all my audio issues from yesterday, so if there's any problems, feel free to let me know. I'll be checking the screen in the comments there as we do. All right, Florida 13-point favorites. Now, again, I'm feeling pretty confident right now because I'm able to snuff out these weird lines where they're just like, why are they getting so many points? What do they know that we don't? That one I feel a little leery about. I'll probably stay away from it. I think Florida's way better than Missouri, but I don't know if they're 13 points better, but I'm not going to bet on Missouri. That's for damn sure. Total of 154. When it comes to Missouri, there are really only a handful of options that we want to look at. The matchup against Florida is going to be good, though. Missouri, who comes into SEC play with a fantastic record, ends up losing every single game they've played so far for the SEC. Last time they won was on December 30th against Central Arkansas. That is just tough. Don't fire Dennis Gates, though. He's a good coach. He just needs to get some better people in there. Sean East is the big dog on campus. Scored 33 real points in their loss against Arkansas. He is the guy. If you want to roster somebody from Missouri, it would be Sean East. He's only 7.5. That's a misprice for what he's going to give you. 3 straight games over 35 fantasy points. Got a little banged up, ending up playing all the minutes in the world the last 3 and against tougher opponents, against Ole Miss, Tennessee. Obviously, the Arkansas game, not so bad, but he did score 37 against Tennessee as well, giving him a road matchup here against Florida in which he should be able to dominate. Last time they played Florida at home in a loss, he only had 6 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. Part of the problem where they're stop me if you've heard this before, uncharacteristic foul trouble for a guy that doesn't really have those foul issues. He ended up fouling out in just 25 minutes, missed a lot of time in that one. I don't suspect that we will see any kind of foul issues here. At least I hope we won't. But I am very, very high on Sean East for this one, kicking us off. 25.6% usage rate, 24% shot rate. He's actually shooting 47% from long range, which is 13th best in all of Division I basketball. And that is a huge improvement in his career. Last year, he was believe it or not, a 22% three-point shooter. At Bradley a couple of years ago, a 31% shooter. And way back during the COVID, if you remember that by now, as of all those years ago, for UMass, he shot 32%. Went on to some non-D1 schools, went nuts, but he is absolutely crushing it this year. It's a shame that he's going to go out on a bad Missouri squad. Much like Judah Mintz today, just these sub 8K options, they maybe not the staple plays by any means, but they're just underpriced. You got to hit those type of plays. Trey Hannibal was underpriced today. There's just a couple of guys where I don't really care about the matchup. I'm a big DBP guy, but if the price is severely broken, I just have to play him, and I got to get exposure to Sean East somewhere on this slate and in my various lineups. Also have Tamar Bates, who has been a revelation this year since transferring from Indiana. He's a pretty big, I wouldn't say a one-trick pony, but he is very reliant on his ability to knock down threes. He has been rebounding quite well the last 3 games, but at 6'5", not really interested. His price had ballooned close to 8K as he was just dominating on some of the games that East missed, but I am not going to be utilizing him too often there. I'd rather just pay the 7.5 for East, or we might be looking at Noah Carter, who is viable at 6'1" here against Florida. I know he has been struggling this season, but he has played 28-plus minutes in back-to-back games, and this is a nice spot for him against Florida if he can stay out of foul trouble, so I don't mind him. More of a GPP look for sure. As far as anyone else here, Nick Honor, no. Jordan Butler starts, but he's the dreaded 5th Beatle. We're looking at probably 10 to 12 minutes. Bench-wise, Aiden Shaw, Anthony Robinson, Maber Majek, there's just really nothing there. This roster is gutted. I want to play Sean East and really no one else on that side. On the Florida side, they are starting to get relatively deep. It's making it tough because they are a lot of cannibalization, one of my favorite words, going on here with the Gators individually. We're seeing a situation in which Micah Hanlogden, who, obviously gets into foul trouble, but he's basically splitting with Alex Condon, which waters down both of them. Thomas Howe, who showed such a solid game recently. What was it? The 26 minutes he played against Georgia because everybody in front of him got into foul trouble. Only played 13 against Alabama, which wasn't surprising, but with the foul trouble again to Micah in the Vanderbilt game, he played 18, and he's been pretty solid. So the future is bright for the Gators as they have all these younger players like Alex Condon, Thomas Howe, Denzel Alberdine, Riley Kugel, if he ever gets a pulse again, and Micah Hanlogden is only a sophomore as well. So a lot of youth on this team, and technically Walter Clayton has 1 more year left if he wants it as well due to COVID. As far as any main team plays here, it's kind of tough. Pricing is reasonable. I think Walter Clayton at 8.2, that's going to be a tough ask. Zion Pullen at 7.8, that one feels pretty good to me. He did have a rather down game against Vanderbilt, but I do think we see him pop back up over 30 fantasy points here in a matchup against Missouri that is just way too good. He was dreadful against Missouri, only 15 points, 11 real points, 15 fantasy points. But other than that, he's been consistently hitting 29 to 32. An outlier there against a bad Missouri team. I would expect him to bounce back in a big way here against them and finish out the getting to wind down the regular season here with a very big performance. Other guys in that game for Florida, it was a relatively balanced effort. Tyree Samuel had 17 and 3. Micah Hanlogden had 10 and 13. Walter Clayton had 15 and 3. Will Richard 13 and 4. Nobody on the bench did a lot. Riley Kugel had 8 points and 7 rebounds. Hugo, not a usable option. Just when you think it's safe to go back in the water, he has played a combined 9 minutes over the last 2 games after he played 25 and 29 minutes in the 2 prior. So really difficult to use him. He's only 4.8. I think at this point, unless he would be starting, which is not going to happen, or you have a really good read on the Florida team, maybe you're around the campus, maybe you know beats, maybe you're, around that program to where that Riley's going to play more or not. But at 4.8, it's worth a throwaway lineup in a large field GPP, but he is not to touch any main lineups right now until further notice. I like Alex Condon always. I'd love to see him start. He benefits a great deal when Micah gets into foul trouble. That is something that he has himself. Both of them have high foul rates. Both of them are cheap. Rarely will they go off together, so it's one or the other if you want to play Micah or you want to play Alex. My preference is Alex. They're essentially the same price. Micah as the starter, so he would be the more popular of the two if somebody's going to be used. Will Richard at 5.9 is okay. Tyrese Samuel at 7K. I think he's an elite play. A lot of people will overlook him. He's been a little bit priced up here in the 7K range, and he hasn't drawn much ownership. Minutes-wise, he is starting to lose some playing time to these various other wings and forwards that they have on the team. So that is a little bit of a risk there with Samuel, especially if this game gets out of hand and Missouri just drops out very, very early. We might see some of the youngsters on this Gators team play and Samuel end up playing less than 25 minutes. If that's the case, it would be an absolute disaster. So that pushes me into Zion Pullen, or if I really want to be safe, Walter Clayton, but I just don't think I'm going to have that luxury to play him at 8.2. So that's 2 expensive, semi-expensive guys in Sean East and Zion Pullen. But again, Sean East under 8K for what he's doing on this team, that is a very, very big misprice for my money. Next game on the slate here, Auburn versus Tennessee. Total of 151.5. Tennessee is 6.5 point favorites. This is going to be a big test for Auburn. Obviously going to be going into March feeling themselves. They have a really deep roster. They switched some things up here as Jalen Williams is dealing with an injury that's cost him a couple of games. He's officially tagged as questionable for this one. It's a knee injury. Now, based off of what I've read and practice reports, it really seems unlikely that he'll go. But I've thought that about several guys over the past 2 or 3 weeks, and then they end up playing. Some of the injury reports that we're getting from these teams are either outright lies or there's just real porous job by the beat writers going on. And I don't want to be that guy, but as we get into more states being legalized for sports betting, money on these games and into March, like we got to have some transparency here with the actual status of these guys. Like dressed out, that terminology has to be thrown in the trash can. You're either in or you're out, not dressed out. I don't know what that means. I don't want to hear that shit. Please, never. So we'll see what happens with Jalen Williams there. They did switch up the starting lineup last game against Georgia. A good time to do so against an inferior opponent. They did still have Janai Broome there, but they went ahead and inserted Chaney Johnson in the starting lineup. My guy, Chad Baker, who won us a afternoon slate GPP over the weekend because nobody rostered him. Everybody went to Chaney, who did well, but Chad Baker, obviously without Jalen Williams, he's going to absorb all those stats. He did. And the freshman Aiden Holloway got back in the starting lineup over Trey Donaldson. He played relatively well, hit 5 triples, getting his confidence up. And then Denver Jones, who just really hasn't been able to get acclimated to SEC life. KD Johnson, Trey Donaldson, Chris Moore, all came off the bench, played the usual 12 to 18 minutes. Now, Donaldson only played 12. The issue there is if he doesn't start, you really can't use him. He had gotten into the mid-20s there as a starter for a few games only a couple of weeks ago. But now that he is, dropped out, he's going to play less. You just can't utilize him right now. We can start to look back at Aiden Holloway. Now, this is a tough matchup on the road for a young, inexperienced freshman like Aiden Holloway. He's going to have to hit threes to get there. He's not going to add a lot in terms of peripherals, but that 4.2 price is really good. But starter or not, I think we're looking at a guy who's capped around 22 to 23 minutes, and that's the same thing we've been talking about with Auburn all season long. As far as Chad Baker, he's priced up after a really strong 44 fantasy points against Georgia. This is going to be tough. Without Jalen Williams, I think we see him play close to 30 minutes. I love him in the starting 5, has that guard forward eligibility. He's just so important to this team. And if Auburn is going to go to the second weekend this year, it's going to be obviously on the back of Janai Broome, but they're going to have to get some really strong play out of Chad Baker. And when he is scoring 20 plus real points, which doesn't happen often, but he has that in his bag, Auburn is nearly unbeatable. So they're going to need him for this matchup against Tennessee. He's more of a luxury play at 7K. Tennessee at home is not unbeatable. We've seen them drop a game or two, that they shouldn't have. But generally, I'm not looking to target against them too much. So my guy, Chad Baker, like him, not going to be rostering him heavily like I have been. Chaney Johnson at 4.7. I would imagine him to be really chalky if he starts again, and depending on what Jalen Williams' status is. Now, Chaney's minutes have been trending in the right direction. He played 17 off the bench against Kentucky, 17 off the bench against Florida, 14 off the bench against South Carolina. Then he gets to start against Georgia, plays 27 minutes, 16 points, 4 rebounds, his way to 25. Expect him to be really chalky, just like Timberlake tonight. And it doesn't really matter about the matchup because he's so cheap. And if he's going to get the minutes and the volume, he should be able to eke his way there. Also has forward eligibility instead of guard, which makes him a lot more appealing as a value option there. So we'll watch out for the starting 5. If he doesn't start, I wouldn't be in on him. And if Jalen Williams plays, then that would pretty much take him out of play as a value as well. Luckily for us, it is one of the first games on the slate. This one does start a half an hour earlier than usual. They left off the Georgetown game today of today's slate, which was the 3:30 start. They're not doing that with Florida, so don't get caught with a dummy lineup or guys in the wrong spots. Be prepared for a huge sling of second tier or second wave games after lock on the Florida. As far as Tennessee goes, we know the drill. Dalton Knecht, high usage, high shot rate, just has been a phenomenal player. He's very expensive at 8.5. Going up against Auburn. Auburn defensively, they've been sound. They play at a tempo that is very conducive to fantasy points and overall just fantasy goodness, top 80 in that. But their defense has reached 5th best per Ken Palm, and they are one of the best defenses in the country right now. Obviously, you've got Houston, Virginia, these guys, but Auburn's D is right up there with the best of the best. Number 1 in defensive effective field goal percentage right now. Tennessee defensively, number 2. So we're not looking to get into super stacks, and they're 3rd in defensive effective field goal percentage. So we don't necessarily want to be stacking this game here, but this is also one of those games that'll mess with the, we can't use it. It's going to be lower scoring, or there's going to be guys shut down. There's going to be fouls. Like, this is also a game I could see with 2 efficient offenses and some absolute studs across both rosters, having it be into the 80s, possibly even flirting with overtime, and then seeing some really big scores. It is going to be tough to fit some of these guys. Knecht at 8.5 is just a luxury play that I don't think we're going to be able to get to. I would love to do so, but that is going to be really, really tough. Hey, Ethan, what's up, my man? Ethan Artiega jumping in here, is talking to us. What is up? Appreciate you checking out the show. Other options who are a little bit more realistic, or I should say achievable. Zakai Zeigler at 7.9, who I absolutely love. Veteran. He is healthy. He will not falter in a game like this. He doesn't, lose it in the moment. He's very, very, very steady. I love Zakai Zeigler. I think that he is an excellent GPP look at nearly 8K. I don't suspect a lot of people will be rostering him. We haven't seen that much rostership on him over the last 2 months of the season. You'll remember early November, late December into January, we were getting him at a sub 5K price point when he was still banged up. But, man, he has really been good in SEC play, and it's going to be interesting to see how Auburn is able to check him, if at all. The matchup between Jonas Aidoo and Janai Broome, that one's going to be interesting. Aidoo has been a major breakout star for the Vols, 29-plus fantasy points in 4 straight games. Again, tougher matchup against that Auburn front court. They have bodies in Bierman and Moore that can use their fouls, bang Aidoo around, perhaps get him into foul trouble as well. I don't love this spot for him, but there's been a couple of games here where I thought he was in a rough spot, and he ended up panning out quite well and still paying off this upper price that he is. 7.6 is a lot to swallow for Jonas Aidoo, but he is definitely playing extremely well. Toba Waka is there at 5-2. Don't think I'm going to be chasing him after a monster performance against a bad Missouri team. And he followed it up with a solid 22 fantasy points in only 17 minutes against Texas A&M, which was a big blowout victory. They're obviously going to be using him more. He has started to mature at the right time, right as they're getting close to the March Madness, the tournament, and the SEC tournament. Having a guy like Waka playing well confidently and being able to give you 15 to 18 minutes is just going to be such a major boost for this team, but he's not cheap enough for us to really speculate on. Santiago Vescovi is at only 4.9. Anytime you can get him under 5K has to be in consideration. Playing 20-plus minutes, has a still sizable shot rate. Kind of a lower end value, but he's definitely somebody who's going to be in our player pool here and will help us get some of those upper tier plays up top. Also, you have Jordan Gainey, whose minutes were down against Texas A&M in the blowout there, but typically I think we see him play roughly 20 to 22 minutes. He's only 4.2. They brought him over as an offensive, off the bench type of guy that gives them a boost. Dalton Connect has worked out better than anyone could have imagined, except us. We knew how good he was. We talked about it all summer long. But the kid from USC Upstate, Jordan Gainey, was an absolute star for them last year, has kind of settled into a nice role. His three-point shooting has really suffered. He's only 29% after being a career 40% shooter, but he still has time to figure it out. They're still giving him opportunities, and I think he's going to be an important X factor for this game against Auburn. All right, next game on the slate here, we're talking Providence versus Marquette, total of 150. Now, Marquette's 10.5-point favorites, and I guess that makes sense. Marquette's had some pretty lackadaisical games. They've been a virtual disappointment, at least recently to us. Got their doors blown off by UConn, absolutely melted against DePaul like everyone does, but the blowout win that they had over Xavier, it just caused them to really take their foot off the gas. Joplin had a decent game, but Oso Ighodaro was pretty awful in that one. Chase Ross was not good off the bench. So it's really tough, and especially with Cam Jones right now, who is just shooting unbelievable. He scored 34 real points in that game against Xavier. He is clearly healthy, finally. Back-to-back games in which he scored 34 real points. So his price has jumped up to 7.3K. Providence is still, even though they're shorthanded, they're a tough group. Defensively, they are nothing to sneeze at. I do think they can get into Cam Jones shorts. I instead like Oso Ighodaro and Tyler Kolek more in this matchup. Kolek versus Devin Carter, that will be a fun one-on-one matchup that should be worth the price of admission. Last time out when they played, this is way back in December against Providence, they lost 72-52 or 57. Kolek had 21, 9, and 5 for 40 fantasy points there, getting a slight discount there at 8.7, not over 9K like he has been. Obviously a threat for a double-double and triple-double anytime he takes the court. Still a slight discount on Oso Ighodaro at 8.1. The Xavier game, they just didn't need him. That was pretty much what it was. Like I said, I try not to worry about blowouts too much. I mean, we looked at the DePaul game. We were all over him at like 5% compared to the rest of the field. He had 43, and that was a major blowout. So you really can't play for the blowout worrying about that. Just so happened that they gave him some time off there. In their first matchup against Providence, he had 8 rebounds, 11 points, a moderate 21 fantasy points, but I do think he's playing so well, has to be in consideration regardless of the matchup. Still have cheapies, David Joplin as the heavy in the rotation starter, taking a ton of shots, back-to-back games over 20 fantasy points, still under 6K. I do not mind him. 5.1 for Stevie Mitchell. His price has come down considerably after he was over 6K, and he was an easy fade for the last few weeks. Had a nice outing against DePaul. Everybody does. This is a tougher spot against Providence, but a starter at 5.1 in this offense certainly makes some sense. But he's losing minutes to Chase Ross, Ben Gold. It's important to make that recognition that he's not playing these 30-plus minutes like he was earlier in the season. Speaking of Ben Gold and Chase Ross, both are cheap, 4.5 and 4.4. Both are going to play roughly 15 to 20 minutes. I don't mind Gold here, especially if you think there's some foul trouble brewing for any of the guys in front of him, like a Joplin or a Ighodaro. And then Chase Ross, who is very important. I think in this game in particular, they're going to need his offense, which he can give, believe it or not, and his defensive prowess as well. Probably will have a turn or two on Devin Carter as well. Played almost 30 minutes against Providence. He was 0 of 7 in that game, but he was out there because of his defensive aggressiveness all game long. Doesn't really help us for DFS, but usually minutes lead to opportunities. Opportunities lead to fantasy points. So Chase Ross is in the conversation as a value option. Providence, Devin Carter's 9.5. You kind of just want to figure out how to roster him any possible way. Now, he's had a string of easy matchups. St. John's, Butler, Creighton, DePaul, Xavier. This will be a tougher matchup for him against a Marquette team that can get after it on the defensive end. However, when they won 72-57 in their prior meeting, Carter did throw up a 41 casually. This was back when he was priced at 8-1. Obviously, 9.5 is a much, much bigger price that we will have to pay. Gotta love Devin Carter. Now, again, this game took place on December 19th. This was before the Bryce Hopkins injury. Devin Carter had a good game. Ticket Gaines had 18. Josh Odoro had a near double-double. Very balanced effort off the bench. Providence they looked the part. So they're obviously kind of limping into this one. Gaines has been injured, although he's still playing. They've been rotating out that fifth starter. It's really tough once you get away from Carter or Josh Odoro, who's now priced at almost 9K himself after some really big performances the last month of the season. There's not a lot to necessarily like, especially in this matchup. Ticket Gaines is cheap at 5.8 and typically plays a ton of minutes, but he has been in foul trouble lately. And as I mentioned, he did suffer an injury that caused him to miss some time, not game-wise, but he missed a sizable chunk of time in these last two games where he was sitting out. And they took that opportunity when they can, like in the DePaul game and in Xavier game, he ended up in foul trouble, but they have been trying to work him out, playing Floyd and Rich Barron more minutes there, while giving Gaines an opportunity to rest and try to heal up here for the stretch run. Jaden Pierre's back up to 6-1 after he puts up a near 40. He can get hot. We know he's a very streaky shooter. He's not a guy that I'm ever looking to roster at over 6K, so that won't be the case for me here. Pretty much an easy fade for me, whether he works out or not. Corey Floyd is going to flirt with 30 minutes, low fantasy point per minute player, not any real upside. Rich Barron has that guard forward eligibility, another lower upside guy, but at 3.8, we don't need him to be high upside. He played 28 minutes against Xavier. He's played 22 or more minutes in 4 straight. Remaining a starter, he is a value piece that we can use. I don't think we see him put up, more than 8, 9, maybe 10 fantasy points, but we don't necessarily need all that much more. And we can get the rest of those points and make up the difference from some of those payups that he gets us. So I'm okay with playing Rich Barron here as a value piece. Rafael Castro's just not getting the minutes. Unfortunately, they're using him as a foul guy. And Garwi Duell, who has just struggled this season, came into the year with a ton of hype. There were outlets that had projected him as a possible lotto pick. That is no longer the case. He obviously needs to come back to school. He's only 3.4. He's been in and out of the starting lineup, but this is not the time to take him. I don't think he'll get more than 10, maybe 11 minutes. All right, next game on the slate is an ugly one, Northwestern versus Maryland. It's a 128-point total. So we're talking about a knock them down, drag them out, slobber knocker, as JR would say, type of game. Maryland is a 5-point favorite. We had a nice outing from Northwestern in their last game. Brooks Barnheiser against Michigan just absolutely whacked them. 19 points, 12 rebounds, 2 blocks, 3 steals on his way to 51. That has caused his price to go up over 8K. Now, Maryland, people haven't really made the recognition, but Maryland games have been so ugly. And while they've struggled at times, they have defensively made life very difficult for their opponents. And that has led to some very mediocre fantasy results for their games, especially when they're playing teams like Northwestern. Now, last time these two teams met, it was a 72-69 win for Northwestern. Brooks Barnheiser did have 5 steals, 15, 4, and 3, which is a fine stat line, but the 5 steals put him over the top. Boo Boo, he had 20 and 7. Ryan Langborg, 8. Ty Berry at the time had 11. Luke Hunger, when he was still starting, barely playing. Matthew Nicholson 10-7. Nick Martinelli 5-4. On the Maryland side, Jahmir Young had to do a lot. 36 real points. His usage rate in this game was 43%. Julian Reese, who couldn't stop turning it over, had 10-9 and really had very little help. Jordan Geronimo had 12-7. They got almost nothing off the bench. Actually, they got 0 points off the bench. So that was a rough one. I don't expect a lot of fantasy goodness in this particular game. Bowie and Barnheiser and the low 8K range, they're certainly feeling to me a little underpriced there. But again, the matchup is just treacherous. And if you think Barnheiser is going to rack up the stocks like he has been doing, then maybe it makes sense to use him. Matthew Nicholson at almost 7K, that is way too high. That'll be an easy fade. I know he had that huge game against Indiana, but he dropped back down to earth, sub 20 fantasy points. I'm not going to be going there. I do think Martinelli's fine, 6'3". He's going to continue to churn out 20s. Very low upside play, but he is a guy that fits a balanced build, and I'm okay with. And then you have Ryan Langborg, who's locked into a 30-plus minute role, who's going to be a very heavily relied upon guy here as we get into March. And after playing with Princeton last year, has shown he has got ice water in his veins. No Ty Berry, of course, out for the season, which means more minutes for Martinelli, more minutes for what we've seen. Mullins, who had been playing some additional time, dropped back down to 6 minutes against Michigan. We don't have to really deal with any of the deep bench for Northwestern. We only have to really look at their starters, and even then, they're just low-end options for me. On the Maryland side, Jahmir Young at 8-4. It's a good price for him. He's a second-half player. Remember that. He has a ton of games in which he's just very, very slow starts. Doesn't put up a huge number in that first half. Easy to tilt. He ends up just taking over second halves. It's a very tilting way to deal with it, but Jahmir Young's definitely a high-level GBP look here. Like I said, absolutely took over the game against Northwestern in their last matchup. In that one, he took 19 shots, got to the foul line 11 times, put up 52. Julian Reese is 8-2. That's a good price for him, and at least he's at home, so that negates some of the foul worries. Northwestern has size, has the bodies, has the physicality, so I'm not probably going to be using Reese all that much, but he does excel in these kind of games if he can stay out of foul trouble. Then you have Donta Scott, who has been playing extremely well, 20-plus fantasy points over the last 5. His price at 6'4" makes me uncomfortable. He's a write-off for me. If I'm not using Reese or Young, I'm probably moving on. But there are several sub-5K options on this Maryland team that we can look at. It starts with Jordan Geronimo at 4'7". He put up 30 against a very tough Rutgers team. Now, when I say a tough Rutgers team, I don't mean like that they're super good or anything, but interior defense and rim protection is solid. He made quick work of them, 11 rebounds against that Rutgers front court. He was very, very good. He's healthy now, it appears. His knee injuries, that has been kind of just a nagging issue for him for the last month of the season, appears to be held in check, and he is somebody at 4'7" I have interest in. If there were foul trouble for Reese or Scott, Geronimo pushing towards 30 minutes at this price is actually a way better play than I think most people are going to realize. The freshman Deshaun Harris-Smith, he's starting to come into his own. He's getting more minutes. He's playing a lot. He's taking shots, getting to learn under Jahmir Young. Only 4'9", probably better suited as a GPP look, but that is very cheap for a kid that I expect to play 34, 35 minutes. Then you have Jamie Kaiser, whose minutes seem to fluctuate. He's very raw, but he's taking a bunch of shots when he's out there, usually threes. He does rack up steals as well. He's only 3'7". When he's playing around 20, 21 minutes, there is merit to using him, but there is a real possibility of a bagel or a negative as well. So if he comes out and shoots 0 for 5, gets 2 turnovers, it is a very rough situation to try to recover from. Wouldn't recommend using him in your main build anytime soon. I do like Kaiser's future prospects for next year, but really just Jahmir Young, Julian Rice, Geronimo, and Harris-Smith if you want to get exposure to this one. All right, next game on the slate, we have Duke and Louisville. I'm going to give you my take on court storming. You didn't ask for it, but we're talking about Duke, so I'm going to give it to you. Real quick. Duke is a 20-point favorite in this one, total of 151.5. Now, say what you will about court storming. It's been going on for all of time. The land, when dinosaurs roamed the earth. yes, it's a scary situation when a team's not prepared. Kyle Filipkowski getting injured there, dealing with the knee issue. I don't think he's going to actually miss the game. He didn't tear anything that I'm aware of. Not really the point. I think that court storming should be allowed, but I also think that there has to be some sort where we've evolved to this level of, athletes are stronger and we are, in an era where we're more connected to them. Like we can, tweet at them, we can talk to them and be next to them in a way that we never could before. So fans feel entitled, and it's a big deal. Like if you're a program that's maybe not used to winning, or you knock off a big time opponent, like the court storming is a rite of passage. But what needs to happen, you either need to tell your program like Jerome Tang did for K-State, like, okay, I'm going to give you one. He said, this is what he said. I'm going to give you one court storm. After that, when we beat a good opponent, we're not going to court storm anymore. We are going to act like we've been there before. We don't see Duke or North Carolina, these teams court storming. We need to set an example. And I kind of agree with that. At the same time, you should be able to court storm when you beat a hated rival that's maybe, a top 5 or whatever. But what has to happen is there has to be better security, which isn't easy to do at college games. I recognize that. Maybe some sort of timer where, you got to stay off the court for 35, 40 seconds or a minute. Let these, let the Duke guys get off the court, or the road team get off the court before you go crazy. I think it was a perfect storm there of, kids being out of control, running at Filipkowski, him not moving. It obviously wasn't his fault. I saw that some people were saying it was. I don't know that anyone individually was to blame here, but we've just evolved as a society and as a sports fans where we got to have some kind of stricter rules when it comes to this, storming the court or being able to be so close to players. So that's my take there. Allow court storming to happen. However, act like you've been there before as a team, depending on what that win is. If it's like a super emotional win over a team that maybe you've lost to for 20 straight years, then I guess I understand it. But if it's not a tournament win, title game, whatever, you probably don't really need to do the court storming. I kind of agree with Jerome Tang in that you need to act like you've been there before, but it's obviously a case-by-case basis. And at the end of the day, let the fans court storm if they want to, but got to have better security. Jay Billis talking about keeping everybody that comes on the court detained and arrested is the most hilarious thing I've ever heard. They don't even have enough security guards to detain 5 people, let alone 1,000. So some pretty wild takes out there this week, but long live the court storming as long as it's done intelligently, which may not be possible. I don't know. All right. So with that being said, Filipkowski, if he misses, there's obviously going to be a ton of value. Now, I don't think he will miss, but what I do think could happen is this is going to be a very easy game for Duke. They're going to be able to just pile drive Louisville in a manner that reminds you of, early 90s WCW. There's going to be a bloodbath here. Ken Palm has it 88-66, and I feel like it might even be a 30-point win here. So what that means is he probably will not get full minutes. And I know I talk about not worrying about the blowouts, and I don't, but this is a situation where it does make sense. Duke is going to win this game. They have a very tough schedule to end the year, a home game on Saturday against Virginia. Then they're on the road on Monday against NC State, and they finish out the regular season in a week at home against North Carolina. So they don't need to mess around and re-aggravate anything, get anybody hurt. Just take your home win over Louisville and then gear up for Saturday's game against Virginia, right? So to me, that means Filipkowski's probably going to play less than 25-ish minutes if he goes at all. Maybe they do decide to sit him, which would surprise me, but I don't think he gets a full allotment of minutes. Now, he hasn't been very high owned the last few weeks. In projections, he's just totally a slate breaker because he was priced at 9K, 10K, all these times. 8-1, 8-2, 8-3. Now he's 8K. Like, it's just way too cheap for him. He's just such an easy play at that price. And it surprises me that more people weren't rostering him the last few weeks. Yes, he had a down game against FSU, but he put up 44 against Wake Forest the first time they played, 35 against them in their last game, and then he put up a 36 against Miami. All at sub 10% ownership. I think mostly just FTN people on him. So it was very surprising to me. Ordinarily, I'd go into it like this: 8K for Flip against Louisville. Yeah, he's going to put up 35 with these. I'm going to roster him at 8K, but there's that variable of, might he be limited? Might he get pulled early? Is he going to play at all? We'll have to see. So he's probably not a main team play, even though in the projection sheet, when I release it in the Discord tomorrow morning, it's going to be near the top. And Adam Young knows that because he always is. There are other options on this Duke team that I like with or without Flip. If he doesn't play, then yeah, that's going to give us some mega value. Ryan Young, who just seemingly will not graduate ever. He's going to be in collegiate basketball for life. Is only 3'6". If Flip didn't go, you can expect him to slide into the starting lineup or at least play 15 to 20 minutes. And when Ryan Young gets minutes, he is exceptional. He has always been this cheap guy. When he was at, Northwestern, high fantasy point per minute player, good rates, can put up some points for us in a hurry. So I'll be watching that news there closely, because if we get Ryan Young as a value at 3.6, that opens up a lot more for us across the board. We also have Caleb Foster, who's still relatively cheap at 4.7. With Proctor, those minutes predictably went down. He played about 23. Low-level value for me, but without Flip, that would get him back into closer to 30 minutes. I know they don't play the same position, but when you look at the composition of their roster, it would just make too much sense for Foster to not be out on the floor. He's going to be out there playing a lot more. Tyrese Proctor played 31 minutes. He's only 5'7". Love the price on him. I would really, really be interested in rostering him in multiple lineups, all formats without Flip. Again, they don't play the same position, but a lot of that usage from Flip and shot attempts would go directly to Proctor. He's a fantastic play at 5'7", regardless of Flip status. Definitely near the top of my priority list. Also like Jeremy Roach, he's a bit more at 6'5", but he's very safe at that price. It's not going to be below 20 fantasy points very often. And then perhaps the biggest benefactor that isn't Ryan Young, if Flip is out, would be Mark Mitchell, who's going to see an increase in rebounds and stocks attempts, as well as obviously shot attempts. Now, he was pretty mediocre against Wake Forest, had the big game against them at home a few weeks back, had a nice outing against Miami as well, struggled against FSU, tends to get into this every other. So he had a pretty rough game against Wake, but I would certainly be rostering him at 6'8", which is a fair and reasonable price with or without Flip. Not a big fan of Duke, but I obviously want to have some exposure here. Now, if we want to get cute, well, before that, I also have Jared McCain at 7'7". Shot ridiculously well against FSU, 73% from long range. Shot 75% in their last game. That was on 4 attempts, though. High-level player, but that's a bit pricey for me. I'd rather go Proctor or Roach. And then if we want to get really cute here, depending on how that news shakes out, we have the highly rated recruits that there's just been no time or opportunity for yet. And Sean Stewart, who's there at min price 3K, perhaps a GPP large field value dart that you can throw out. And TJ Power, same thing. Maybe he gets, 9-10 minutes there at min price. So you can throw those guys out there, but obviously not main team looks. On the Louisville side, they have a ton of guys, dealing with injuries and have been out. Hersey Miller is they mess with the starting lineup a lot. Hersey Miller was in there as a starter. He's obviously been out for quite some time, but this roster is just, it tells you how pitiful this season has been when they're using a guy like Hersey Miller pre-injury in starting capacity. They do have a group of talented guards that we can consider for DFS purposes here. Now, the Notre Dame game was awful. They got buried there. But minutes-wise, we have seen Trey White, BHH, Sky Clark, who's now apparently healthy, and Mike James ascend into this role where they're just going to play damn near every available minute. Tyler Johnson still coming off the bench. Curtis Williams, these are two freshmen who I don't think will end up being in Louisville next year, but they're very talented. And then the other freshman, Caleb Glenn, who, when he has his fouls in check, is quite productive as a cheapie, played 28 minutes in that game against Notre Dame. So looking at Louisville in this spot, we have some good prices. BHH at 7.7, that's probably a no. I don't know that I can get there. I do think Trey White at 7K makes a lot of sense. However, I think Duke's best perimeter defenders, which tends to be Roach, will probably be on him. Mike James is where I would look at 6.3. I think that's an advantageous price for him. Does have guard forward eligibility. And then you come down here, you've got the 5K Caleb Glenn, who probably won't stay out of foul trouble against Duke, but he has the last couple of games, and that's led to some pretty big production. 36 against Georgia Tech, 21 against Pitt. Last game against Notre Dame in 28 minutes, he only had 3 points, but he did have 6 rebounds, a block. He was very active, just couldn't get a shot to fall, and he's very cheap. Curtis Williams off the bench at 4.5, guard forward eligibility. Didn't play that much in Notre Dame, but before that, he had played 24-plus minutes in 3 of his prior 4 games. So there's some cheapies here on Louisville that we can look to. And if it turns into a big blowout and they get to play the walk-ons and the deep bench and the, inexperienced freshmen that are there, we could see guys like Curtis Williams and Caleb Glenn put up some nice stats, especially in garbage time, as they say. So we'll see how that shakes out with flip status and the actual starting 5, but I obviously have interest in both of these teams here for this particular slate. Hey, is that who I think it is? Corey's Jen. Mr. Wald stopping in to say hi to the DFS. I don't know about the GOAT, but I appreciate that, man. It's very good to see you, my friend, my Arkansas buddy. It's a shame that both of our teams are so terrible this year. Didn't get a chance to bet me and get me to do the call that I did last year. I have that still in a archive somewhere on the video. But good to see you, man. Appreciate you coming by. Always like waking up to your Twitter DMs that have the strange tweets and videos. It's a highlight of my day. So appreciate your continued support, my man, and be talking to you here later, I'm sure. All right, next game on the slate, Oklahoma versus Iowa State. Now, the Cyclones are 9.5-point favorites, which I like the Cyclones, but this is one of those lines where I don't know that I believe they're 10-point favorites. 137 total. Porter Moser, on Oklahoma, defensive-minded team. Cyclones also have defensive chops. So this is one, obviously, that I think a lot of people will probably just gloss over and ignore, and for rightfully so. It doesn't have the fantasy environment that we really typically want to look for here, but I think there's going to be a couple of options that we can consider. Last time these two teams played in early January, it was a 71-63 win for Oklahoma. Tamin Lipsey struggled, fouled out in under 30 minutes. He has been having a pretty rough 2024 after having such great non-con. Robert Jones had 12 and 7, and off the bench, Hassan Ward also had 12 and 7. But overall, Iowa State really struggled there against Oklahoma. Javion McCollum had 15 and 5, and we saw Latrey Darthard score 11 off the bench. Now, it was a very gritty game. There wasn't a lot to like from a DFS perspective. I don't expect that to be the case here. I think we will get some decent performances here. Jalen Moore is there at 6'9", and we really have to talk about him. He scored 30-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. That's against the likes of Oklahoma State, Baylor, and BYU. He is playing some of the best basketball of his career and seems completely dialed in here. Now, fouls on the road against the Cyclones front court certainly has me feeling worried, and he's not going to be a main team play for that reason alone, but he is somebody I want to have GPP exposure to. On that slate against Oklahoma State a couple of days ago, I was kicking myself because the sheet had all the Jalon Moore in the world. I ended up going away from him in that one, and he has a 31 fantasy point game at sub 7K. Still a good price for him, just not the greatest matchup. Now, when it comes to the rest of Oklahoma, we're generally looking at the trio of Milo Suzanne, Javion McCollum, or Otega Awe. Awe has been struggling but it's caused his price to tumble all the way down to 5-1. And even though he's been struggling, it's important to note the minutes are still there pretty much. He played 31 against Oklahoma State, 24 against Baylor, and 23 against Kansas. Now, there was some foul issues in their first matchup against Oklahoma State a couple of weeks back, which caused him to play just 14, and against BYU, which caused him to play only 21. So a lot of those foul issues have been the reason for his struggles. Not a great matchup, but the price is right. And if he plays over 30 minutes in a starting capacity like he normally does, he should be able to volume his way to value. Now, in the first matchup with Iowa State, got majority of his points at the foul line, only scored 13 fantasy points overall. Not going to sit here and declare him as a main team or a core play, but this is one of those buy low opportunities where you just have to feel like you need exposure there. The Sooners have had a deeper bench, but with John Hughley dealing with a meniscus, he's not going to be playing for this one. He's not out for the season, but it seems very unlikely that he plays again until conference tournaments. So they have a need to play their guys that are available at way more minutes. And I think Awe does see that 30+ in this matchup. 6-2 for McCollum is a real nice price. Some of the best rates on the team, but his overall production and upside have tanked hard. The way that Oklahoma guts out games and plays so ugly, it has led to a lot of mediocre performances. And the prices are now really, really appealing for these Oklahoma guys. So I'm always on or in favor of using McCollum in places, but even I have to admit this is a really tough spot to use him. Same with Uzan at 6'2". Rivaldo Suarez is there at 5'7". He has been uber consistent over the last 4 or 5 games. He has not been below 20 in either of the games against Oklahoma State or Baylor, and going back to February 3rd against UCF, that was the last time he didn't make value at this price. But again, tougher spot. His emergence is definitely taking offense away from Ortega and Javion for what it's worth. Then you have Latrey Darthard, who's locked into 20+ minutes off the bench. He's only 4K. Low upside play, though. This is one of those, you're not going to get a lot from him. It's less about him, more about what he gets you, that whole spiel. And then at 3.7, you have a guy who steps in and is playing some minutes in Luke Northweather for John Hughley. Hughley from Pittsburgh, you remember he was a very good, playing 25+ minutes, a fantasy asset that hasn't worked for him here. He's been stuck in a 15-minute per game role. With him out, Northweather has just absorbed those minutes, and he's playing about 13 to 15 and not doing a whole lot with them. So not a lot to get excited about for this Oklahoma team, even though they are priced reasonably. On the Cyclone side, we still have cheap to min Lipsey. He delivered 31 against West Virginia, shot 4 of 9 from the field, 6 assists, 4 rebounds, 2 steals, and 14 points. I like Lipsey anytime he's under 7K, and he's going to project well. This isn't the greatest spot. Foul issues that he was suffering earlier in the month seem to have subsided, at least for now. Looking at his performance against Oklahoma, like I said, he struggled. He hit 19, but the fouls really kept him from getting into any kind of rhythm, and he shot 1 of 10 in that game. I am going to have a real long think about if I'm going to roster him in main. I already know he's going to project well, regardless of the slower pace, low total, and just the defensive physicality that this game is going to have. But we like Lipsey because he typically can fill it up in those other categories. And when he scores 10+ real points, that's when he can really ascend into a slate-breaking type of score. Haven't seen it lately, and he's going to be low owned, but this is a spot where I think it's a mistake to fully fade him here. Sean Gilbert's there at 7-1. He's kind of taken over the alpha role from Lipsey. I would rather play Lipsey there than Gilbert. And then Curtis Jones, who has been a really solid offensive weapon. He's a price now at 6'4", where we can't really use him. He doesn't offer a ton other than his scoring, and he's kind of stuck in a 20 to 22 fantasy point range. Just no upside there. Trey King is cheap at 5'4". Like Trey King, despite the fact that he struggled against West Virginia, fouls are a thing that happened to him. And also it's tough because on a game-to-game basis, it might be Robert Jones. It might be Trey King. We see Hassan Ward have some nice games. Milan Momklevovich will pop off from time and time again. And there's just a lot of shared minutes and usage there at those 4 and 5 spots between those 4 guys. It has made their prices low, but it's also made their upside nearly non-existent. So if I had to take one, I do lean Trey King still. Do get some value here with Hassan Ward at 4-6, who had a nice game against West Virginia, 6 points, 2 steals, and 5 rebounds. And in their first meeting against Oklahoma, he did have 12 and 7. He was really solid there, and that was during a string in which he scored 20 or more fantasy points in 4 straight without playing more than 18 minutes in any of those games. So Ward doesn't need a ton of PT to pay this 4-6 price off, and he does do pretty well in the physical, more slow-paced, uglier type of games. So we might be able to use him at 4-6 there in a main and feel okay about it, but we also don't want to be stacking this one. All right, next game on the slate here, UCF and Oklahoma State. The total on this one's 139.5. Oklahoma State's 2-point favorites. Nah, I don't think so. Cowboys are a wreck. Boynton has just not really been the guy. You know, you waste the year with arguably one of the best prospects in years. He did win 20 games last year, but they haven't been too good. And so far at 12 and 15, had the overtime loss to Oklahoma. They pressed them, but I do think UCF wins this one here. So +2 sprinkle the money line on UCF. I'm all for that. Starting with the Oklahoma State side, Jamyron Keller has been our guy. We've been using him a ton. He's still pretty cheap, sitting there at 5-6. Played 37 minutes in the overtime game against Oklahoma. Did not pay out. Scored 14, but before that against Cincinnati and BYU, both tougher opponents, he paid off handsomely, 36 and 25. He's just playing huge minutes regardless, and sub 6K. Yes, UCF is usually a stay away spot for the most part. Defensively, they have a level of play there that does worry me. But Keller is just a guy that I feel pretty good about in that price range, and think that I'm just going to continue to roll him out there as a high minutes, higher floor guy that I'm very comfortable with. His shot rate and usage rate have both ballooned towards 20% here as a starter. He's shooting 37% from long range, and he's definitely a guy who is looking for his shot when he's out there. Started the last 3, still very much in play. Other options cheap, John Michael Wright, who played 36 minutes in the last one. He's just 5K. Has struggled, but again, another high minutes, kind of safer floor play against this UCF team. Kyan Williams has ballooned up to 6'7" after back-to-back games over 30. Now, he got benched earlier in the year because of his poor ball handling ability, the high turnover rate. Seems like he's figured things out. He's putting up some pretty huge numbers here. 12, 8, and 8 against Cincinnati, 21, 8, and 2 against Oklahoma. I don't think I could bring myself to pay 6-7 for him, but he is definitely one of the best players on Oklahoma State right now while he's in this streak. Javon Small also only 7-2, which is a cheap price for him. I could see him get into a battle here with Jalen Sellers, where those two play one-on-one for majority of the second half. So there is some GPP merit there for him as well. Brandon Garrison at 5'9". If he stays out of foul trouble, he is a pretty solid option. UCF has size and a ton of almost seemingly endless amount of front court bodies. So I'm not sure it's the best spot to target Garrison, but there is upside there at 5'9". On the UCF side, Jalen Sellers is a paltry 6.3K. Now, the last 5 games, you're going to look at his logs and nothing stands out to you very exciting, but he is still taking a ton of shots. He has 6 for 11 against Texas Tech, 1 of 11 against West Virginia, and 6 of 13 against Cincinnati. So still double-digit shots for him. The peripherals have fallen by the wayside, needs to score to pay off, but we are getting a slightly depressed price here for sellers. And when you look at overall rates, he has a 27% shot rate, which is the highest on the team, a 24% shot rate, a 24% usage rate, shooting 31% from long range on a team high 145 attempts, and drawing nearly 5 fouls per 40. So I'm not ready to give up on Jalen Sellers yet. I do think this is a nice spot to target him at expected lower rostership, and a team in Oklahoma State that he can absolutely detonate against. Just needs to be hitting his shots, and I think we do see him do that here. Darius Johnson is 7-4, significantly priced up compared to Sellers, and that's because he is in a midst of a massive streak. We saw this last year from DJ, in which he was putting up 30s in 4 or 5 straight games. Then he fell off. He's in that streak right now, 32 or more fantasy points in 4 straight against BYU, Cincinnati, West Virginia, and Texas Tech. 23 shot attempts against West Virginia. So DJ and Sellers are handling majority of the offense for UCF. Shamari Allen is healthy, playing big minutes, but he's a secondary option there on offense. Did have 32 against Cincinnati thanks to 7 assists and 4 rebounds. At 5'2", he's got to be in the conversation because I like the matchup against Oklahoma State, but he's far from a priority. If you land there as a last guy in and you're not using Sellers, then it makes some sense to use him. I don't know that I'm looking to stack UCF guys, but if I fall into 2, I'm certainly okay with it. They have some intriguing front court options who are cheap. CJ Walker at 4'9", who is good for 4X at that price, plays about 20 minutes, barring foul trouble. Marcellus Avery, who has mega upside. He needs foul trouble from the guys in front of him, but when he gets 20-plus minutes, he absolutely detonates. And when Walker was out for a time, Avery held it down. I do really like him, but you can't use him without somebody being out right now, unfortunately. Ibrahim Diallo, another front court player who's getting about 20 minutes, and the same with Omar Payne. All of these guys getting roughly 20 minutes, putting up close to 18 to 20 fantasy points. And then you can throw Tierno Silla in there, who's 3'9", also playing roughly 18 to 20 minutes. Walker is the guy to use at 4'9" if you want one. I don't mind him, even on the road here against Oklahoma State. All right, next game on the slate, Cal versus Colorado. This is probably the game of the slate for me. It's a Pac-12 game, higher total, 152. Colorado is 11-point favorites. There's going to be plenty of juice in this one. For Cal, it starts with Jalen Tyson. He has just been really consistent. Cal has suddenly won 3 in a row. They beat the Huskies, which was brutal. Oregon State and Oregon. Now they got Colorado, Utah, and Stanford to end the season. Tyson, 30.2% usage rate. That's top 50. 30% shot rate. 36% from long range. A defensive rebounding rate of 17% and an assist rate of 22.5%. Tyson is just such a strong overall option. The price is high at 8.6, but he falls into 40 more often than not. I really like him here, even on the road against a Colorado team that has shown some real ability to get after it on the defensive end, but does not have any consistency. When they played back on January 10th, he did score 30 real points on his way to 42 against Colorado. If you can afford Jalen Tyson, it's always an advisable move to do. If you're worried about road splits, he's been fine, 34.5 fantasy points on the road. I like Jalen Tyson. I don't know if I'll get there, but he's definitely in my player pool. As far as the rest of Cal goes, Vardaz Amack is definitely a high-end GPP look. Don't love him in this spot against Colorado, who's suddenly getting relatively healthy, although there is some stuff we'll talk about here in a second. Keontae Kennedy is pretty cheap at $6K. He had that major upside streak when he first got eligible, has been rather mediocre lately. Jalen Cone is cheap at 5'3", playing a ton of minutes. Not a lot of upside there as he struggles to find his shot. And then Jalen Celestine, also pretty cheap at 5'3", playing a ton of minutes. He has scored 18 or more fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 while playing 30-plus minutes in 4 of those last 5 as well. On the Colorado side, we have Julian Hammond with a questionable tag, dealing with a knee injury. Has not been practicing from what I've read. Also, Cody Williams is dealing with some issues, which he's been banged up left and right. So we'll see what happens there. I suspect he'll be fine, but that is one of the major reasons why you've seen him struggle, at least lately. He is having some flare-ups from what I've read on Colorado beat boards. KJ Simpson is expensive at $9K, but he has to play nearly every minute, has to take nearly every shot with the various Colorado injuries that they've dealt with. He is a nice luxury play in a spot against Cal where he can absolutely detonate. He was rather mediocre against them the first time, 12-5-3, and he does have some downside here because he has a tendency to disappear for stretches. Nothing more maddening than a 9K player who is, gone 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes with no fantasy points. Shooting 46% from long range, which was top 20 in the country. He has worked very hard on his shot. 28% shot rate, 27% assist rate, and a 26% usage rate. Other options for Colorado include Tristan Da Silva, who has benefited from Cody Williams, struggling. Da Silva's there at 7.4. It is a reasonable price to get to. He has a safe floor. I do like Da Silva there. I haven't found myself rostering him as much this season as I did last year, and a lot of that has to do with just the fact that his price has been up. Shooting 38% from long range, has a 24.5% shot rate. Then you have Eddie Lampkin sitting there at a real nice 5.7K price point. If they get AMAC in foul trouble, and I think they will, especially on the road, this will give Lampkin an opportunity to just own the glass, rack up boards, get a couple of buckets in there, and coast into a nice 25, 26 fantasy point score. So I like Lampkin as a main team guy there just because he is cheap, and at home with an ailing Cody Williams and Julian Hammond will likely be asked to play more minutes. 6'8", Javon Hadley, it's expensive for him, but he has scored 30-plus in 3 of his last 5, taking on a lot of that offensive load while Cody Williams, Luke O'Brien, Hammond, all these guys are in and out of the lineup, playing through injury, sitting out. So Hadley has really stepped up. It's a bit expensive for my taste at almost 7K, but he is definitely putting the results on paper. Then you have Luke O'Brien, real cheap at 4.4. I do think he's playable here, especially if Hammond is out. Has played 23 and 31 minutes in each of the last 2 and coasted right into a 4X number and about 18 fantasy points. So O'Brien is a value that I'm not super jacked about, but I'm looking at him as a probable main team value with Colorado. And Cody Williams ailing, they have a rotation that's probably about 6, 7 guys deep. Javon Ruffin will be thrust into some more minutes, but for the most part, Luke O'Brien is probably the only guy off the bench that will see anywhere close to 20 minutes. And we could have some more value. Maybe Williams, ends up missing, or at the very least is labeled limited. Maybe we get some value with a guy like Banga Dak or Hassan Diop, but we would have to monitor the news for that. But as it stands, Luke O'Brien is definitely in the main team conversation for me. Next game on the slate, South Carolina versus Texas A&M. Total of only 135. That makes sense because of how South Carolina has defended. It's a 5-point spread in favor of Texas A&M. That's one that I feel like may be wrong. If we would have saw Texas A&M -8, I'd be all over it. But as it stands, I think 5 might even be too much. Ken Pom has it 68-66 in favor of the Aggies. They've been struggling. 4 straight losses to Vanderbilt, which was a tough 1-point loss. Got absolutely blown up by Alabama. Lost a close one at home to Arkansas, a poor loss. And then they got blown out on the road by Tennessee as well. They finish after South Carolina with Georgia, Mississippi State, and Ole Miss. So not the easiest schedule here. And as they sit at 15-12 with Buzz Williams, they're quickly finding themselves on the outside looking in they probably have to win out, and they didn't have to win out after they beat Tennessee at home back on February 10th before this 4-game losing streak. So this is an important game for them, needless to say. With the struggles, it's made their DFS options very risky. They have not been performing, but these busts that they've been having has caused their prices to diminish quite a bit. We do have a Wade Taylor price of 7.6. Now, he has not eclipsed 30 in any of the last 4 during this losing streak. The big home win against Tennessee on the 10th, he put up 42. A easy win at Missouri before that, he put up 36. And a close loss against Ole Miss, he put up 50. So we know the upside for Wade Taylor is incredible. He's just been struggling. 30.5% usage rate, which is top 40. 32% shot rate, which is top 50. Assist rate of 27.5% and a steal rate of 4% while drawing 5.3 fouls per 40. Wade Taylor at 7.6. Yes, I'm very interested, needless to say. You do have the 6.7K Tyrese Radford, who's also been struggling along with Wade Taylor. He did put up 30 against Bama and 41 in their win against Tennessee, but on the road against them, they shut him down. There is upside for him at that price as well. Anderson Garcia is just an elite GPP look. He has been such a solid rebounder for this team. 3 of his last 5 games, double-digit rebounds. Doesn't score a lot on the offensive end, but he does everything else for this team. His price is a bit high, but if you're looking for a 1% type of play that can put up a 30+, Anderson Garcia is that guy. Henry Coleman played 28 minutes in the loss against Tennessee, and it's actually the second time in 3 games that he has eclipsed that mark. So we're seeing Henry Coleman start to play more. The results haven't necessarily been there, but he's very cheap at 5.3, and if he puts up 19 to 20 like he has in each of the last 3 games, definitely makes him somewhat interesting. Solo Washington is a fouling machine. That is part of the reason why Coleman's minutes have gone up. But you see, when Solo plays over 25 minutes, he detonates this price time and time again. It's far too cheap for a guy of his talent. If we're going to get 30 minutes, it's an easy play. But we don't know that. Our Gray's Sports Almanac hasn't come in the mail yet. Or my man Brett Belke has it, and he's not sharing it. If Solo stays out of early foul trouble, the 30 minutes is an inevitability, but there is numerous times in conference play, especially as a starter, where he has picked up a quick 2. He's gone up to have like 1 or 0 fouls in the second half, which is maddening, of course, but it has cost him some minutes. In each of the last 2 games, he's been under 25, but he has scored 24+ fantasy points in 3 of his last 5. So I love Solo Washington. South Carolina has the rebounding ability and some size up front that could bother him. They have the drivers to cause foul trouble as well, but at home in a must-win situation, have to like Solo Washington here. On the South Carolina side, we have a very cheap Meechie Johnson at 6.4. It's tough though. He's just going through it, man. He was so hot in the non-con and early SEC play. He was never this cheap all through that streak. We're talking about 7.7, 8K, like just a very deliberate offensive option that has suddenly gone ice cold. 1 for 11 against Ole Miss, 0 for 4 against LSU, 2 for 9 against Ole Miss the second time, 3 for 7 against Vanderbilt, which is better. He was 8 of 17 against Auburn, and then 1 of 8 against Tennessee, and 0 for 9 against Missouri. So some really tough shooting going on there for Meechie. He has stepped up and contributed highly in steals and assists, and he's been rebounding extremely well lately. 14 rebounds in his past 3 games total, but the scoring hasn't been there, and that's caused his upside to fizzle out. But against Auburn, he went off for 22 real points, which puts him at 35. That type of stat line is very possible here against Texas A&M, and he's only 6'4". But much like Carlton Carrington, who did well tonight, I can't use him in a main lineup because of the downside for it. I did have GPP exposure. I'm going to be treating Meechie Johnson the same. I can't core him and throw him in there as much as I'd like to, and I think he's fine in this spot. I mean, we're talking about a 27% shot rate. We're talking about a 25% usage rate. He's shooting 33% overall this season from long range, but he's breaking a lot more. His assist rate has gone up recently as well to 22%. So there's a lot to like about Michi here, but until he can break out of this cold streak consistently, I don't think we can use him in our main builds. Colin Murray Boyles is amazing. It was only a month ago we were getting him at 4K, 4-5. Just this kid's a star. This is a future SEC first team All-American. Like, I am just enamored with this kid. It's a higher price at 7-8. He's a luxury play. We won't get there, but he has just been so phenomenal. And with Michi struggling, they've had to lean on him a lot. He has been a much better option at home, but that doesn't mean anything. He was solid on the road against Auburn, 19-7. He has scored 26 plus DK points in 4 of his last 5. Overall, looking at his rates, 23% shot rate, 24% usage rate, and assist rate of 18%, which puts him in that Derek Walker-esque quarterback category. A combined rebounding rate of 28%, which is phenomenal. A block rate of 4% and a steal rate of 3%. Draws 4.5 fouls per 40, but he does have a 4.3 fouls per 40 called rate. He's only a freshman, still has more development to go, but he looks like an absolute star in the making. So I do like him as well for GPP purposes. Miles Stude is questionable for this one. Did not play in the last one. He has a nagging knee injury, which caused him to miss that game. That is what kept him out of some games earlier this year as well. He is a very cheap option at 4.3, but with that injury and the possibility of him being limited if he does play, not something that I'm looking to get involved with. That does give us a bit of value to possibly look at once again with Jacoby Wright and Zachary Davis expected to absorb more minutes. Off the bench, Jacoby Wright played 26 minutes in that last game, and Zachary Davis ended up playing 31. Now, Davis has remained in the starting lineup since Stude went out in early January, and with him back, he hasn't come out. But what happened is his minutes went from 31 to 18, 20, 22, but without Miles, he did play 31, and he was good. 14 and 9, an assist, did have 4 fouls. Got to the foul line 8 times. He looked really, really good. He's only 4.3. Without Miles, I would be interested in using him there because it's a starter that I can expect 30 minutes from. And Jacoby Wright there at 4K as a kind of an offensive option off the bench there, capable of putting up a 4X number there as well, especially if we get around 25 to 26 minutes for him. And I think that would be the case. So we'll monitor that. That is one of the last games on the slate, but Miles Stude's about 22, 23 minutes to go around, and that very clearly went into the totals of Wright and Davis in that last game at the very least, and I think we would see more of the same here if he were to sit out once again. BJ Mack is just okay. Talon Cooper is just okay. Both of those guys are middling to me. Cooper's cheap at 6K, so I don't hate it. Mack at 6.2 as well. More GPP looks. There's a lot of downside with Mack. And he's also not playing the minutes he was earlier this season. They seemingly are rotating in guys like Gray, Vermondonk, Clark sometimes, Ugusk. Those are all coming out of BJ Mack's total there. Cooper is playing big minutes, 35, 36, but he is a relatively low upside player overall. All right, last game on the slate here, St. John's versus Butler. This is the game that I think a lot will be interested in. Obviously, it's a hammer game, but total of 153, which makes it the highest on the slate. Butler, a 1-point favorite. St. John's had to get a win. All the Rick Pitino trashing his team and talking about them being a bit gutless and weak. They got the close win on the road against Georgetown, and then they went back home, played a tough Creighton team, and won 80-66. Just an absolute huge, huge win there that they had to have. Now, St. John's gets the benefit of playing Butler, DePaul, Georgetown to end the season. This Butler game is going to be tough. Ken Pom has it 77-76 in favor of Butler, but finishing out against DePaul and Georgetown, those should both be wins. So getting this Butler win and winning out should put them back in the right side of the bubble, win a game in the Big East tournament perhaps. But that Creighton game, that was absolutely huge to saving their postseason chances. Dennis Jenkins had 27 points, 6 assists. Joel Soriano, 12, 7, and 5 with 2 blocks and a steal. A very solid outing there. And it was really just a balanced effort from everybody on the St. John's side. As far as overall options of who we can actually use, there are some cheapies here. And this is the second time that they're playing. The first time it was 86-70. St. John's did turn in the win. We saw RJ Lewis with 14, Brady Dunlap with 13, Ledlam with 13 and 11, Joel Soriano with 14 and 12, Dennis Jenkins with 17, 5 and 7. DJ Davis scored 25 for Butler, hitting 5 threes. Posh Alexander had 11, 6 and 5. Prices for St. John's on the road here. Jenkins, he's a luxury play at 8K, but he's going to play a ton of minutes. I suspect him to be in the running for top scorer on the slate in this matchup. I think you see him put up a close to 40 here. So if we can get there with him, I definitely want to do so. Joel Soriano's tough. The price is really cheap at 7.2. Minutes can be a little sporadic sometimes. The leash is shorter, but he has played 30 minutes in each of the last 3 and consequently has scored over 30 fantasy points in each of those as well. Butler doesn't have much of a front court to speak of, so theoretically, barring foul trouble, Soriano should be in a position to absolutely detonate here, and he is the St. John's member that I'm the most interested in here today. Chris Ledlam is cheap at 6K, very solid floor. Somebody who took a little bit of time to realize he's not the alpha, but he settled in as a secondary piece quite well. Has a usage rate over 18%, combined rebounding rate of 27%, 4% block rate, 3% steal rate. Just a really nice piece there at 6K. RJ Lewis, who has a very strong overall rates across the board, a high fantasy point per minute player when he's not fouling, a 29% shot rate, which is highest on the team, a 27% usage rate, which also highest on the team. He can fill it up in a hurry, but he picks up a lot of dumb fouls, and we only saw him play 11 minutes against Creighton there in their last one and did not start against Georgetown, in which he did have a nice game off the bench, 19 and 6. So you're seeing a lot of up and down performances there from Lewis. He's a GPP look at 5'8", but that is a very low price for him when he is on. There's no telling if he's going to be fouling or not, engaged in the game, getting a quick hook. So you can't use him in your main. Rather go to Soriano, Ledlam, or Jenkins, but definitely will have some GPP exposure to a player like that. Jordan Dingle had a legacy game a while back against DePaul for us. Then he had a legacy game against Georgetown as well. 21 against Creighton, but he is locked in. He's taken a ton of shots. As the season dwindles on, Jordan Dingle is starting to take a more active role in the offense, and he is playing really well. 5.6 is an okay price. Offensively, I think he can pay that off, but we'll probably look at any points props that he has instead. I don't know that we'll get there in a main build. Glenn Taylor, who had been starting randomly, played 32 against Creighton, scored 30, 4 points, 10 rebounds, 6 assists, a block, and a steal. I will not be chasing that. I foresee a lot just plugging Glenn Taylor in, especially if he remains in the starting lineup. He started each of the last 2 games. But be careful, because this is a Musselman and Arkansas situation, because the prior 5 games before that, he started against Georgetown and played 7 minutes. 5 minutes off the bench against Seton Hall, 3 minutes off the bench against Providence, and 4 minutes off the bench against Marquette. Then all of a sudden, he plays 32 against Creighton in a game that got out of hand, and they just owned them. He played really well. So this is one of those spots where I foresee some ownership. I'm not going to chase it, even if he starts, and we'll get our resident St. John's experts take on it tomorrow in the Discord with Stills. But if he's not starting, he's an obvious fade, and you might not have the luxury to get off of him because it is one of the last games on the slate. And if you are buying into Glenn Taylor being this 30-minute pregame starter, which I highly doubt, you won't have a lot of moves that you could switch to. I guess Sean Conway, which is really not a high upside play, although he is just 3 games removed from a 24. Naheem Aline, who's sitting there at 3.5, typically good for 20 minutes, but low floor, low upside play. Like not a lot you can turn to there. So just tread carefully. I don't think that's a lock and load like some will probably say here this time tomorrow. On the Butler side, Pasha Alexander and Revenge Narrative Part 2. He's only 6.6K. I love Pasha Alexander. This is going to be a really big spot for me to roster him. He had 27 against his former team in their first meeting. We know the deal on Posh. He's going to fill it up. Has a high assist rate, has a high steal rate, has not really been the best shooter this year. I thought he would do much more in terms of improving that, but he did make 4 of 6 from downtown against Villanova 2 games ago, and he did make 3 of 5 from long range last game against Seton Hall. So perhaps our guy Posh Alexander is finding his range, but 6'6", it's a great price for him. Jamil Telfort's there at 7'3". They're going to need him to play much bigger. Butler doesn't have a ton of size in the front court, and they're going to need Telfort to be able to man the interior and while still remaining versatile enough to hit threes. It's going to have to out-rebound Soriano. Foul trouble has fallen on him, but he's been very good. 28 plus fantasy points in 4 of his last 5, playing through those late foul issues. A bit pricey for me, but the results are there. DJ Davis at 6'1", more of a GBP play because he's so reliant on his shot, but he takes a ton of threes. You see the game against Seton Hall, 3 of 10 from downtown, just absolute chucker. Pierre Brooks is there at 6'1". He's gone through some struggles after just running through the non-con and early part of the Big East schedule. He has fallen off, failed to register at least 15 fantasy points in each of his last 3. He did get hot against Marquette back on February 13th and put up 27. He is a streaky scorer, but again, it's only 500 more for Posh Alexander, who's infinitely safer because of his stronger peripherals. I'll go that way instead. The front court that they do utilize, Jalen Thomas, whose minutes were dwindling there for a while, but have spiked back up. He has played 25 plus minutes in each of the last 4, and he has only failed to reach 25 plus fantasy points just once in the last 4 as well. They're going to need him against St. John's for sure. You also have Andre Screen, but his minutes are dwindling again with Jalen Thomas going up. Screen needs the foul trouble for Thomas to get the time, and he's not that cheap at 4.4, all things considering. So Thomas has to be big. Posh Alexander's our guy, and Telfort is going to also have to play a much more aggressive style than maybe we're used to seeing from him. But this is definitely the game to get some mini stack action for. All right, getting into cores. We're being highly efficient. We're just about done here. This is a wide open slate. There are a myriad of interesting options that we've gone over. It's kind of like today. There was a core that I really liked. We had some mixed results, but overall we ended up being profitable. We're going to keep rolling through here. I don't want to fall in line and just roster, the top of the sheet or other guys that are going to be extremely popular like we think. So this is one where I think we can get a little creative. And as expected, Kyle Filipkowski at 31 minutes does project over 5x. Just the way it is with his total overall rates. But I think I'm gonna put Posh Alexander as core play number 1. And he does double as Posh play of the day because I don't know that he'll garner all that much rostership. So very high on him in this spot. Will be utilizing him heavily. Joel Soriano at 7.2. Expecting 30 plus minutes. There just seems very unlikely for him not to pay that off. So we'll be utilizing him as well. And then the third member of the core, this is where it's a little bit more open. I think I'm going to go with Jalen Sellers. This is going to be the probably more true Posh play of the day. So I kind of have a 1A, 1B for the Posh play. And if you're new to the show, that just basically means my version of the sneak. But I love Sellers in this spot. He's only 6'3", going to get overlooked. I think he scores 20 real points. Doesn't have to do a lot in terms of his peripherals there, but anything extra would be icing on the top as he cruises into a potential 5x type of score here. Very, very excited about him. All right, looking at PrizePicks, let's get into it. We've been running pretty well on PrizePicks, by the way. Check it out on FTN's PrizePicks tracker. FTNDaily.com is where you can find that. Just going to double check some of the numbers here to make sure. So I like Sean East against Florida, over 17 real points. I think we might see him put up a 20-plus real type of game in this spot against them. So I'm all over him there. Let's see. Devin Carter over 17.5. Just has to handle so much of the heavy lifting. That makes way too much sense there. Cody Williams under 12 points against Cal. Not because it's a bad matchup, but he's just not – he doesn't look right. He's clearly not healthy, so I'm going to take under 12 there for him. Let's see here. Under 14.5 points for BJ Mack. Not buying that. That seems way too high. Over 6.5 points for Solo Washington. Like that. And then let's see. Let's check out some PRAs. As usual, the fantasy totals will be up in the morning. Those will be some of the featured article plays. We've been running really well on the fantasy. It's funny because PrizePicks really doesn't offer much fantasy totals anymore because they just get raked, and we have been crushing them whenever they do post the very few 8 or 9 fantasy point totals that they give for players. They have just been very, very low. We're going to continue to crack them there as they provide it. All right, PRA a bit tougher. Obviously, you don't get the steals and the blocks, which can be a mind meld there for you at times. Jalen Sellers over 19.5 PRA. I just like Sellers in this spot. I think he's putting up 20-plus real, so doesn't have to do a whole lot other than that, so I'm going to be definitely taking that number. His point prop is 14.5, which I also like. Yaxel Lendenberg is going up against Wichita State. His point prop 16.5. We've been hitting his prop, kind of just not talking about it a lot because UAB is not on the slate very often. But Yaxel is been very good for this UAB program. As they've struggled offensively at times, he just continues to churn out big numbers. This will be the 4th time in the past 6 games we have utilized his point prop. He had 26 against Tulane, 16 against Rice, 26 against North Texas, 17 against Tulsa, and 17 against Florida Atlantic. We'll hit the over 16.5 there for Yaxel Lendenberg. All right, I believe that will wrap us up. We're just about done. We'll be back Friday night right around 9:30, 10 o'clock PST, depending on how that slate ends there. I like to finish the games before we go live. And then starting next week, we're going to be adding a Saturday night show. So we'll be going Monday night, Tuesday night, Friday night, and Saturday night. And then as we get into conference play, we'll be adding a Wednesday night show as well. FTNDaily.com, FTNBets.com, multiple packages there. You get access, if you become a member, to every single sport we offer. Content, written, main slate articles, optimizers, projections, betting trackers, PrizePicks trackers, poor plays, player pools, everything you need to be a successful and competitive DFS player, whether it's tennis, college sports, NASCAR, or any pro sports. We offer it. We're very comfortable, confident, and happy with the community that we built. And we're going to charge on into March. Thanks for you guys' continued support. And I will see you next time, Friday night, in a couple of days. Let's keep running to the window with those wins and loading up those green screens in the Discord. Take care, guys. Best of luck. I am out of here.